so much for being here with us for our inaugural event, the USM Forum on Democracy with a focus on pluralism. It's fabulous to see so many people here on such a beautiful day in Maine, and what it shows to me is that people in Southern Maine care about democracy, and I'm just thrilled that you're here. Yes. It's really a privilege to gather together with you tonight as we begin what will become an enduring tradition of thoughtful dialogue about the forces shaping democracy in the United States and beyond. As we begin, I want to first thank Nancy Pond and the Pond Family Foundation for sponsoring the forum this year. Nancy's here. Please join me in thanking her. I also want to thank Raj Vinikota, the president of the Institute for Citizens and Scholars. Raj worked behind the scenes to make some important connections for us to host this event tonight, and he will be our second forum speaker as we continue our discussion on November 5th at 5 p.m. So please mark your calendars and plan to join us. I also want to acknowledge and thank all the USM students who are here this evening. It is the first week of class. It's actually the second day of class, and so it is a very busy time, and your presence here demonstrates that you care deeply about our democracy. You are our future and our hope, so thank you for being here. And then just a few words about logistics. Please be sure your cell phones are turned off or are on silent. And please use the QR code that you find in your program. So I guess your phone would have to be on to actually do that part of it. But this is how we'll collect questions tonight. We have a large audience. We want to be sure that as many questions are heard as possible. And so you can submit your questions through the QR code, or you can raise your hand and we can bring you an index card and a pen so that you're able to submit your question. We have some people who will be reading questions for us during the Q&A portion of the program. The theme for the first year of our Forum on American Democracy is pluralism. It is an ideal that Americans have struggled with since the early days of our democracy. When James Madison wrote Federalist 10 in 1787, he was concerned about the dangers of faction, how divisions rooted in human differences could fracture a fragile republic. His solution was not to suppress differences, but instead to design a system that could channel competing interests into constructive engagement for the common good. A century later, the philosopher and educator John Dewey reminded us that democracy is not simply a form of government, but a way of life. He called on us to see democracy as an ongoing practice, cultivated through education, dialogue, and the everyday work of living together in community. It is in that spirit that we launched this forum, acknowledging both the challenges and the promise of democracy, and affirming that higher education has a special responsibility to nurture informed, engaged, and hopeful citizens. It is now my honor to introduce our inaugural keynote speaker, Dr. Eboo Patel. Dr. Patel is the founder and president of Interfaith America, a national nonprofit dedicated to building bridges across lines of religious difference. He is an expert on pluralism, and tonight will provide both historic and current perspectives on this topic. Dr. Patel has advised Presidents Obama and Biden on issues of faith, diversity, and civic engagement, and he is the author of several influential books on pluralism and democracy, most recently, the book We Need to Build. Dr. Patel reminds us that a healthy democracy is not only about managing disagreement. It is about creating spaces where people of different identities can come together to imagine and construct something better than what any one group could build alone. His life's work embodies both Madison's faith in diverse voices and Dewey's vision of democracy as lived experience. We are deeply fortunate to learn from him today, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Eboo Patel.
Thank you. Boy, I'm the lucky one. I'm the lucky one because my family actually chose Portland, Maine for our summer vacation just 6 weeks ago. And so when President Edmondson was like, we'd like for you to come back, I was like, for free? Heck yeah. This is like, I mean, just what a magical place, right? I imagine February is a little less magical than September, magical in its own way. But speaking of magical, like to be on a college campus in the early fall, it's just, it's a sacred place. It's a sacred place, particularly a university that views itself as bringing together people from a range of identities and a divergence of ideologies, that views itself as nurturing cooperation between those people, that sees itself as a part of the wider community, that thinks of itself as elevating everyone. So I'm just thrilled to be here. And we all occupy this, this kind of holy elevator in American life. The historian Andrew Delbanco says, if you were to make a list of the great achievements of American civilization, you think about it, right? Jazz, the Constitution, baseball, on any list of the great achievements of American civilization, you'd have the American system of higher education in the top 5. And that's the gift that we all have. That's the gift that we are all in. Let's cherish it. Let's protect it. Let's improve it, right? And let's realize that it's a treasure that we all get to enjoy. So my hope tonight is we get to enjoy it together. I want to confess something up front, which is that tonight you will experience a Grateful Dead song, not a U2 song. Let me tell you what I mean by that. I'm a huge U2 fan. I saw them, my wife and I, for our 20th anniversary, went and saw the Achtung Baby tour at the Sphere. Here's the thing about U2. They're perfect every show. They're perfect every show. To the second perfect. The Grateful Dead are not perfect every show. Because they're working things out all the time. They're working things out all the time. So tonight, I come to you really in the spirit of a college campus, which is working something out. I am working something out. And so this is the first time I'm doing this presentation. I'm playing this song on tour. I've been thinking about the day that I'm about to tell you about for years and years and years, and thinking about how to make sense of this day. And as I was considering what I might want to talk about here with you all, I just figured what I want to do is take an unfinished problem in my head, present it to you, and tell you how I am addressing it in my own mind through a tradition that I have researched in no small part to make sense of the day I'm about to tell you about. Right? So I think this is what intellectuals do. We choose hard problems and we try to figure them out. And we do it with other people. We do it with other people. So that's what we're going to do together. How's that sound? Great? All right, so this is like the first, the first rendition of Bertha and whatever. It was like 1973 or whatever they wrote it, right? 71. The 71. I had to tell you something. Like, I knew that this would go well in Portland, Maine. I knew these references would go well. Do you know your president wrote a high school book on Jerry Garcia? As soon as she told me that, yes. Right. Hey, man, once in a while you can get shown the light. If you look at it right, that's all right. It's before this turns into a sing-along. And before the college students are like, all right, I got like 5 more minutes for this. So, January 27, 2017. I see America in miniature. Okay? January 27, 2017. So I'm in Washington, D.C. to give a talk to the presidents of the Consortium of Christian Colleges and Universities, which are the more conservative evangelical colleges in America. Bethel, Wheaton, Pepperdine, Baylor, I've been to several of these places. I have high regard for them. I have high regard for any community that has an identity tradition that they seek to continue in a faithful and neighborly way. Okay, that's what I think is kind of the core of my work in pluralism, is how do you continue identity traditions in faithful and neighborly ways? So I'm in town, I'm in DC to give a talk to this group of college presidents. So I wake up early in the morning, this is kind of my practice. I wake up early in the morning to get a quick breakfast, lots of coffee, and to put polish on my talk. So it's 7 a.m. at this hotel in DC, and the lobby is full of teenagers. And the breakfast line is like around the corner. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm thinking to myself, is this like the annual trip to DC for 8th graders or high school students? I look around and there's way more than one school represented. And they all seem to know each other. So it's not like different groups of 16-year-olds sizing each other up. I have teenage boys. I know exactly what that looks like. Like this is like different schools and or different groups of young people, they all know. They're all like camaraderie. And it's kind of loud, but it's like super controlled. And I'm like, okay, what is going on here? And I'm seeing like circles of kids who look like they're praying. Oh, this is interesting. Not an athletic tournament, probably. And everybody's carrying one book. Again, I'm kind of going through my head, like, what's going on, Everybody's carrying one book. And I look at some books, and it's the Bible, King James Version. And I look at other books, and it's the Bible, the Dewey Rames Version. And I look at other books, and it's the Book of Mormon. And I'm like, somebody tell me. So I stop this group of 16-year-olds. I'm like, what is going on? And they look at me as if I'm like the odd man out. And they're like, this is the first time that a sitting vice president has ever addressed the March for Life. And we are here for that. Oh, that's interesting. And one of them says to me, would you like to come with us? And I kind of can't help myself. I'm like, I was actually going to come to the march last week. Everybody know what the march the week before was? January 2017. What was it? Women's March. Blank stares. They'd never heard about it. They'd never heard about it. And so I say, and again, I can't help myself, right? Like I live in Whole Foods America. I live on the north side of Chicago. Like literally, when I read the stat that 70% of people who live in a county with a Cracker Barrel vote Republican, 70% of people who live in a county with a Whole Foods vote Democrat, I was like, wow. And I read it aloud at the dinner table. You know what my older son says? What's Cracker Barrel? That's the world I live in, all right? I am not proud of this. I'm just being descriptive, okay? So I say about the Women's March, which they have not heard of, it was a social justice event. I can't help myself. And one of them looks at me and says, so is this. So I run an interfaith organization. I have lots of friends and people I admire who are Catholic, who are evangelical, who are part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who are pro-life. It is not a view that I share. It is a view that I have high regard for. I understand that it is located in people's identities. I understand it as a coherent philosophy. But as I said, I live in Whole Foods America. Can you guess how many times in the last, 30 years, I have heard somebody assign the category social justice to the pro-life view? Before that moment. Now, you would think that the interfaith guy would know better. Okay? But it just kind of struck me. Oh my gosh. People who are pro-life think of their view as, people who are pro-choice think of their view as social justice. That's just the world that I live in. That's the water that I swim in. You know the old David Foster Wallace story? How's the water, boys? What's water? Of course being pro-choice is social justice. But here's a world of people who's assigned the term social justice to the opposing view. And of course they would think of their view as social justice. Who doesn't think that they're just? Who doesn't think that they're just? There are diverse, divergent, opposing views of social justice. Again, you would think that the interfaith guy would keep that front of mind, but for some reason, January 27th, 2017, that hits me like a bomb. There are divergent views of social justice. By the way, if you were to put aside that group of 120 colleges in America that are more conservative on the Christian side, and if you were to do a word search under social justice around the rest of American higher education, 99% of what would qualify under social justice would code left. So I'm a little embarrassed about my reaction to that, and at the same time, I swim in the water that I swim in. That's story number 1, chapter 1 of a 4-chapter day. Here's chapter 2. So it occurs to me, people here probably know this, that DC is kind of organized like it's a split city, right? And like there are literally restaurants for Republicans, lots of wood panels. I have friends at AEI and Heritage Foundation. I'm like, yo, is there anything but steak on this menu? Lots of wood panels, lots of steak. And there's restaurants for Democrats. There's hotels for Republicans, and there's hotels for Democrats. I am not kidding. Well, I spent a lot of time at DuPont Circle. I have not stayed at this hotel before, okay? But does it surprise you that the hotel that the evangelical college presidents are staying at is also the hotel that the pro-life students are staying at? It occurs to me, oh, I'm in a different world. How interesting. And then it occurs to me, oh boy, I have prepared the wrong speech for this group of people. Right? I've prepared this speech about religious identity and religious diversity, and we're about to have the first March for Life, as I've just learned, with the sitting vice president speaking, and this like massive revolution in American politics. And so I enter this room with these evangelical college presidents, kind of nervous about what I've prepared. Well, it turns out they don't want to talk politics at all. They want to talk about religious identity. And what they are most invested in and most concerned in is that their continuous identity as Christians, as people, as leaders, as shepherds of institutions who orient around Christian identity would not be totally overwhelmed by politics. I didn't hear a single person in that room during my session talk about what was happening on the National Mall that day. Although, honestly, a third of them might have been going at lunchtime. What they wanted to talk about was how did they protect their religious identity from the swamp of politics, even politics that they might agree with. And I was so struck by that, right? And really moved by it, because that's actually a central question for me and my religious identity. It's not that my Muslim identity isn't engaged in the world. It is, but we Muslims have this concept of deen and dunya. There's the world of faith, and then there's the world of the cosmic. There's the world of, there's the concrete world in which you are meant to live in, and then there's the world of the cosmic, and you are always meant to keep that in mind. And these are co-equal. But the world of deen, the actual world, the Harlem of life, that's meant to be considered sacred, but it's not meant to overwhelm the cosmic world, right? Actually, the world of dunya, the Harlem of life, is not meant to overwhelm your deen. It's not meant to overwhelm your soul, right? Not meant to overwhelm the notion of seeking of recognizing tawheed, of recognizing the presence of God everywhere. And that's what these folks were struggling with. How do we keep a continuous religious identity in the maelstrom of modern politics? And it was very personal for them because their campuses had been ripped asunder by the election of 2016. So that's chapter 2, is how do we think about these identities, historic identities, cosmic identities, sacred identities, in a world that actually can really sully them. Chapter 3. A couple hours later, I'm at Union Station having coffee with a friend. And I'm telling him about this social justice moment I've had in the morning of having these pro-life students say to me, well, our identity is about social justice too. And I start to notice people with picket signs start to trickle into Union Station. And most of the picket signs is it's a pro-life march. You know, as you can imagine, it says Mormons for life or Evangelicals for life or Catholics for life. They always register an identity, always mention an identity and connect it to a point of view. But there's a couple of signs that say Reformed Jews for choice, humanists for human freedom, right? People of different identities registering the point of view that their identity is connected with. And I'm looking at this and I'm watching these people kind of eye each other a little bit suspiciously. I mean, they've literally been on the opposite side of like an existential issue for the past 3 hours plus the past 30 years. Okay. But here they are in a train station together. And there's not a riot. Here they are standing next to each other at Blue Bottle Coffee, ordering their lattes. And nobody's fighting. And it occurs to me, they will ride trains together back to Philadelphia, back to New York, back to Baltimore. And on that train, there probably will not be a brawl. And I think to myself, every day, everywhere in America, in park districts, in public schools, in train stations, there are people with opposing ideas of social justice on existential issues who are sharing a space together, who are not brawling on the train. And I take this for granted. But actually, isn't this a marvel? Isn't it amazing that we can profoundly disagree with people on a fundamental issue and still share a space with them? I think to myself, I've had neighbors who I fundamentally disagree with, like on a war. And when one of them broke his leg, I shoveled his sidewalk. Of course I did. Of course I did. And if I had broken my leg, he'd have done the same thing for me. Should we just take that for granted? Is it not the case that most of human history has been a situation in which people of different identities and divergent ideologies have in fact not been able to live together? Not been able to share trains or coffee shops or park districts? Is this situation in jeopardy? Is this what we're looking to strengthen? The container that is able to hold together this kind of diversity? That's chapter 3. Like I said, it was like a rich day. Okay? So I get on a flight, I'm going to Atlanta. I knew it was going to be a long day from the jump, okay? Going to Atlanta, I'm giving a talk at one of the big events of my own organization, Interfaith America. We have events called Interfaith Leadership Summits, where we bring mostly higher ed folks, students. Y'all should come. You'd be great. You'd really enjoy it. Students and staff and faculty together for training on religious pluralism and interfaith leadership. So I'm going to give the keynote talk at the event we're doing in Atlanta this day, January 27th. So I arrive at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, and I'm exhausted. It's been, like I said, a mentally taxing day. And there's all these people in the busiest airport in America, which is the Atlanta airport, in the baggage claim section with signs that say Muslims welcome. I'm like, I cannot deal with another, but evidently it's happening. So does anybody remember what happened January 27, 2017? What happened? What? The Muslim ban. I've been on the plane when the Trump administration has announced the Muslim ban. So people from, 12 countries, Muslim majority countries, Iran, Iraq, Yemen, a few others, would not be allowed in the United States. I'm like, dude, okay. So my dad is in India at the time. But my dad is an amateur bird photographer. And he goes to where the birds go. So who knows if there's beautiful plumage in Yemen at that time of year? I don't know. My dad is going to photograph some of these winged creatures in Yemen and be like, this is the three-throated booby or whatever. He sells me these pictures all the time. So I'm like, I just cannot. I do not know what to, I'm like, all right, I'm going to pretend. Okay. College students never do this. I'm like, I just can't think about this. I'm going to not think about this. Today has already been too mentally taxing. Okay. So I go to the Interfaith Leadership Summit, and I give the talk that I was preparing to give before this major thing just happened, which is basically an Obama-Hamilton talk. I'm kind of an Obama-Hamilton kind of guy, right? That's you all kind of knew that, right? That's kind of my posture to the nation. I'm an Obama-Hamilton. And so I'm doing the whole thing of, Rosa Parks sat so Martin Luther King Jr. could walk so that Obama could run. I'm doing that whole thing. And there's a group of students at the front table who are not having it. They're like, dude, seriously? Our grandparents can't come to this country and you're gonna do the whole mid-20th century, let's be nice to each other thing? Seriously? So, for the next 30 minutes, they let me have it. That rarely happens. That rarely happens, right? It's not the kind of speaker I am. I'm not a controversy-causing speaker, And I thought a couple things about that. Number one, you're right. Number two, you took up all the space in the room. For 30 minutes, you're the only ones who talked. There's other 19-year-olds here. Some of them have no idea what just happened. Some of them are maybe still trying to figure it out. And you registered a point of view in a way that suffocated everybody else's. So what does that mean, even if I agree with you, to register a point of view in a way that suffocates everybody else's? So I've been trying to figure out this day for 8 years. Honestly. What do you do? What do you do when you realize, oh my gosh, I can never use the word social justice again without recognizing that people in the room might have a different definition, definitely have a different definition of justice than I do on some issue. And if nobody in the room has a different definition of justice than I do on the top 10 issues in American life, boy, is my world small. If everybody shares my definition of justice on every important issue in American life, boy, is my world small. So what does that mean for using the word social justice? What does that mean for, honestly, how it's used in university settings? What does it mean to realize, is it a marvel that we just share space with people who disagree with us on justice issues all the time? What does it mean to ask yourself the question, how do I maintain my identity, my particularity in the maelstrom of life? And what does it mean when somebody's like, your inspiring journey story is not enough? It's not enough in the face of a direct assault on somebody's identity. It's not enough. So that day prompted a deep dive into the intellectual tradition of pluralism. And as I said, what I want to share with you today is what I think of as the highlights of that tradition. Like, I'm going to walk you through the catalog, right? President Edmondson walked you through two of the people that I'm going to talk about, Madison and Dewey. Okay? But I want to walk you through the catalog of pluralism. And I want to open this by saying, I don't think this is fully satisfying. It's like a blanket that doesn't fully cover you. But I think it's the best blanket we have. And I think what we have to do is figure out how to have it cover as much as possible or stretch it as much as possible. But maybe I'm wrong. And you'll tell me so if I am. And if you don't tell me so, my friend Raj will tell me so, who just walked into the room. Will definitely tell me I'm wrong. He's the next speaker in the series, by the way. All right, you ready? I think pluralism in the American intellectual tradition starts with this insight. Variety is written into the nature of the universe. Variety is written into the nature of the universe. It's a metaphysical insight. It's about the universe, right? It's not about the facts of life. It's about the facts of the universe. It's a word about the cosmic. And here's the person who says it. William James comes to Oxford in 1908, Manchester College. And I'm going to be very geeky here. He has an argument with Hegel, okay, or Hegelian philosophy. The dominant philosophy of the time, Hegel is the leading proponent, is monism, which is a fancy way for saying that the universe is just one thing. It's just one thing over and over and over again. And William James shows up and he says, actually, the universe is not just one thing. The universe is many things. There is an and that trails after every sentence is his line. The universe is not like a unified nation. It is like a federated republic. And he feels so strongly about this, he calls it the multiverse. Okay? Variety is written into the nature of the universe. By the way, these are the Hibbert Lectures at Oxford. Roughly a decade earlier, William James had given the Gifford Lectures at the University of Edinburgh, which turn into the Varieties of Religious Experience. Why am I saying this? Because this is fundamentally a metaphysical cosmic insight. James is not principally looking at life and saying, oh, there's diversity here. Obviously there is, but that's not what he's doing. He's thinking about the universe and he's saying there's diversity there. Right? He is looking at how people respond to religion and saying, this is obviously diverse. Well, maybe the universe is diverse. And it is a major shift in philosophy. These two are sitting in the front row, Alain Locke and Horace Kallen. They are friends from Harvard at Oxford. Okay, so they both graduated. They both won scholarships. Alain Locke is the first Black Rhodes Scholar. They'd both been students of William James after a fashion. Horace Kallen thought of himself as the successor to James. Alain Locke was influenced by James in more indirect ways. But here they were at this lecture series at Oxford from their Harvard experience, and they have this insight. By the way, Horace Kallen is Jewish. Alain Locke is Black, obviously. He's the first Black Rhodes Scholar. He's also gay. 10, 15 years later, he becomes a Baha'i. These are very interesting figures for Oxford or for America in 1908. And they have this fundamental insight. If the universe is diverse, maybe the nation we can also call that diverse. Maybe what is written into the nature of the universe is also written into the nature of the nation. I want to say, this seems obvious to us now, but it is obvious to us because their thinking becomes mainstream. Because we shift from the idea that the universe is one thing to the idea that the universe is many things. From the idea that the nation is one thing to the nation is many things. What else happens in 1908? Israel Zangwill produces a play in the United States called, does anybody know? The Melting Pot. Israel Zangwill's play, America is one thing. And here's the beauty of it. You can be a part of this one thing, you just have to get rid of your identity. You just have to melt away your Jewishness, your Catholicness, your Italianness, your Polishness, your Irishness. By the way, this was a step forward for the time. This was viewed as progressive thinking. Really, it was. Right? We can all be a part of America, just get rid of the accent. Just get rid of the rosary. Just take off the kippah. Horace Kallen is in an argument with Israel Zangwill. America shouldn't be one thing. We should think of ourselves as a democracy of nationalities, cooperating voluntarily and autonomously in the enterprise of self-realization. He uses the metaphor of a symphony. Like a symphony, all these different nationalities, all these different religions, they bring their instruments to the stage and they play together. There's a little bit of essentialism there. Forgive them, this is 1908. By the way, what else is starting to brew in America in the early 20th century? Something far more nefarious, an idea of the nation far more nefarious than the melting pot. What is it? Anti-immigration. That manifests in the 1920s in what group? What? The KKK. In the 1920s in America, the KKK has 4 million members. America is a much less populous nation, and the KKK is not a small group. It is a powerful group. And if you're offended by the idea of the melting pot, again, remember, it was a progressive idea for the time because the idea of the KKK is you can't actually be American. I don't care if you get rid of your rosary, Italian Catholic. I don't care if you stop wearing your yarmulke, Polish Jew. You can't be American. So Horace Kallen is also in an argument with what he calls Culture Klux Klan. America is a democracy of nationalities. Variety is written into the nation of the universe. Diversity is written into the story of the nation. His friend, Alain Locke, by the way, one of the things I think is so beautiful is these two are friends. They're like exchanging ideas with each other at Harvard and at Oxford. Alain Locke's contribution to this is, you don't have diversity if you don't cherish particularity. You don't have diversity if you don't cherish particularity. When he says, I am not a race problem, he is in an argument with the racists. Stop thinking of my race only as a problem, but also with the anti-racists, like W.E.B. Du Bois. Stop thinking that the only thing important about my race is racism. When he is a 19-year-old student at Harvard, he's invited to give a talk at a local black church. And he says to this group of people gathered, he says, we are not a race because of the color of our skin. We are a race because we have a common heritage. And that heritage is a holy thing. Our identities, our literature, our art, our rituals, our ceremonies, our worship services, these are holy things. These are sacred things. Are you seeing the resonance to January 27th, 2017? And those evangelical college presidents saying, my identity is a sacred thing, and I don't want it all messed up by politics all the time. Our identities are sacred things. What is Alain Locke most famous for? In the high school history textbooks, he is, the two lines are what? What's he most famous for? He's the father of the Harlem Renaissance. So what he does is during the 1920s, he looks around and he says, Claude McKay, Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, all these amazing black artists. Do you not see we are the next chapter of African civilization? Do you not see, as he says, that that there should be a Statue of Liberty in Harlem because that is how special our culture is? And by the way, one of the things I find so interesting about Alain Locke is this idea of African and African-American culture was so open, right? So he does a book, which is kind of the compendium of the Harlem Renaissance called A New Negro. And he thinks that the artist who most beautifully renders black figures is a German guy. So he has the German guy do the images in this book. He's like, our civilization is open. It is a glorious thing, and it is open. Picasso takes figures from African art. We will take images from German artists. It's an open culture, but it is something we take great pride in. Variety is written into the nature of the universe. Diversity is written into the story of the nation. You do not have diversity without particularity, and particularity is sacred. Incidentally, I could have flipped the Callan and Locke slides, because Locke's writing on cultural pluralism and the importance of variety and how it contributes vitality to American democracy are sublime. And one of the lines that Horace Callan is most famous for is, whatever human beings can get rid of, they cannot get rid of their grandfathers. And the particularity of their grandfather's identity is a sacred thing. And so, again, this notion of how Locke and Callan are interpreting William James and applying it to the model of the nation. That's what's happening in the early 20th century. So John Dewey is in a conversation with Alain Locke and Horace Callan. Again, this is all early 20th century, United States and Western Europe. And John Dewey says to Horace Callan in a private correspondence, do you really think that when you invite a bunch of random people on stage with their instruments and they like blow on their saxes and their clarinets, that it automatically becomes a symphony? No, it is cacophonous noise. I believe in your vision, but boy, it takes work. This pluralism thing you're talking about, it takes work to get people of diverse identities to cooperate together, to live harmoniously, to sound good as a symphony. We got to pay attention to it. Got to apply some labor to it. Got to have institutions like college campuses and people like diversity workers who know what they're doing in terms of getting people of diverse identities and divergent ideologies to cooperate. But the work is worth it. Because, as President Edmondson said, John Dewey's idea is that democracy is a way of life, and if diversity is part of the story of the nation, right, and if part of what we're doing is constantly creating new ideas, how do we apply this so that it elevates us? Here's Dewey's line on it. Only a philosophy of pluralism justifies struggle and creative activity and gives opportunity for the emergence of the genuinely new. Only when we think of ourselves as deliberately cooperating across difference can we come up with things that are genuinely new. I once heard Yo-Yo Ma make this point. Yo-Yo Ma is one of the great musicians of along with Rhiannon Giddens, who's constantly interested in how disparate music sound together, right? The Silk Road Project, things like this. He's like, you know where you have the most growth is at the place where two ecosystems meet, a jungle and savanna. It's at that meeting place of two ecosystems. That's where you have these like wild things emerge, right? right? Well, that's the way it is with diversity when you can get it to interact constructively and positively. That's why Dewey talks about it as producing creativity. So here's the person who makes it happen. Jane Addams. By the way, if I had to pick personally one hero in American history, if I only had one hero in American history, it'd be Jane Addams. Because she builds it. In fact, William James says when he visits Hull House, you have done what we all have talked about, right? So Jane Addams, in the late 19th century, when she's all of 28 years old, she builds this institution called Hull House, which I think of as the mothership of 20th century American civil society. Literally every movement, the labor movement, she's a part of the founding chapter of the NAACP, the women's movement, health and sanitation, making cities decent, decent juvenile justice. It all starts at Hull House. And the seedbed of it is the idea that the immigrants coming into the United States, back then from Southern and Eastern Europe, they all have identities and cultures worth sharing. They have cuisines, they have literatures, they have ways of life, they have languages, and we are going to build a place at Hull House that gives them dignity, the ability to express themselves, and the ability to cooperate. So Hull House is a public kitchen. Bring your cuisines, let's see how they taste together. Hull House has book groups, literature societies. Bring the novels of your heritage. Let's read them together. Right? But one of the things that's remarkable about Jane Addams is she doesn't just do it. She philosophizes on it. She's literally the consummate American. She can build it and she can write about it. And one of my favorite Jane Addams lines, we know instinctively that if we grow contemptuous of our fellows and consciously limit our intercourse to certain kinds of people who we have previously decided to respect, we not only circumscribe our range of life, but limit the scope of our ethics. If you think to yourself, and again, this is early 20th century, late 19th century when she was writing this, only the Protestants are righteous and I'm only talking to them, you're narrowing yourself. You're limiting yourself. Okay, it's not only about the violation of somebody else's dignity. You are limiting the scope of your own ethics. You have so much to learn from other people. Horace Callan, right? Diversity is the vitality of a democracy. Jane Addams, diversity expands who each of us is. This is early 20th century, right? This group of people comes to be called the Metaphysical Club. Louis Menand writes a terrific book on this. But they're building a house on a foundation that other people have laid. So I'm going to go back a little bit in American history. And I'm going to mention the exact same thing that President Edmondson does. James Madison in Federalist 10, 1787, 130 years before William James, he's not talking about the universe. He's looking around at what is now the United States of America, literally, like it's just become the United States of America. Okay? And he's like, boy, we got a lot of different people here. We got Catholics, we got Quakers, we got some Jews here, we got lots of different kinds of Protestants here. The way Europe is organized is every religion gets a state. France is for the Catholics, England is for the Protestants. But in America, are we going to kick people out? Are we going to assign this nation to one religion? And Madison does something that is new, at least in Western civilization, for a political entity. He says, actually, we're going to think of variety as constitutional to the country. He's different than James. James is saying variety is written into the nature of the universe. Madison is saying variety is just a fact of life. By the way, I don't really like it. Okay? He's a man of his time. I don't really like it. He's basically like, you got a right to be wrong, and my decision is I'm just not going to hound you about it. Okay? It's just a fact of life. But here's what's interesting about variety that Madison says. It protects all of us. Because if you're Catholic or Methodist or Anglican or Baptist or Jewish, and you look around and you're like, there's 30 other kinds of people here? All right, well, if I want to live free as a Jew, then I have to make sure you're living free as a Baptist, and you're living free as a Catholic, and you're living free as a Methodist. I have to build a nation of freedom so that all of us can be free. He's getting this from Voltaire. Voltaire says, if there's one dominant religion in a nation, it will do what one dominant religion always does. It'll suffocate everybody else. If there's two major religions in a nation, they will do what two religions always do, which is fight. But if there's 30, they got to learn how to get along. Madison takes that and he literally writes into the Constitution, this is the First Amendment. 60 years later, Abraham Lincoln comes to Chicago, and in one of the great speeches in American history, known as the Electric Cord Speech, it'll give you shivers and tingles if you read this speech. He opens by saying, there are people here who are descendant of the founders, those great men. He calls them iron men, those iron men who believed these fundamental truths about human freedom. Doesn't talk about how he violated that human freedom. But they believed those fundamental truths and they fought for them. And if you are a descendant of those men, again, this is 60 years later, so there's literally sons and daughters, grandsons and granddaughters in this hall in Chicago on this Independence Day celebration who are direct descendants of these founders, who are like, James Madison is my great-grandfather. George Washington is my great-grandfather. You ought to be proud of that, is what he says. And then he goes on and he says, but perhaps half of our people, they are not descendants at all of the founders. Again, this is 1858. There's a whole group of Irish people in America now, not descendant of the founders. They literally come to this in the last 15, 20 years. So what are you going to say about them? So here's what Lincoln says. They have a right to those documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And if they believe in those documents, if they believe the same things that the founders believed, they are blood of the blood and flesh of the flesh of the men who wrote them. I mean, it is a signal moment in human civilization to say, if you believe the same things that those people believe, you're blood of their blood. You are flesh of their flesh. So what Lincoln is doing is taking the blood and soil metaphor and placing it in the world of ideas. In America, you are blood of the blood if you believe these ideas, if you hold fast to these documents. That is what he says about human diversity. This is where Callan comes from. This is where Locke comes from. Variety is the vitality of democracy. If you believe these fundamental precepts, you belong to the nation and it belongs to you. The early 20th century thinkers on pluralism are building a house on this foundation. So thus far, it has only been inspiration. But diversity is not just the differences you like. Diversity is not just the differences you like. And because the United States is the world's first attempt at diverse democracy, some of our greatest minds have sought to address that question. Amongst them, one of the great philosophers of the 20th century, all these people, of course, Dewey, James, Callan, Locke, Jane Addams, they're all amongst the great philosophers of the 20th century. By the way, note, what do the great philosophers of the 20th century think about? They think about how you Figure out diversity. That's what their minds are turning on. How do you figure out how people of diverse identities and divergent ideologies live together? So here's what Rawls notices, right? How is it possible for there to exist over time a just and stable society of free and equal citizens who remain profoundly divided by reasonable religious, philosophical, and moral doctrines? I am not pro-life. It is a reasonable position. How do you have a society in which people are staunchly pro-life and staunchly pro-choice? At some point, is that train station going to turn into a riot? How do you continue with this? At some point, doesn't somebody say, hey, it doesn't end at the protest. It continues after. It continues always. It is a forever conflict. If you vote different from me, I can't serve on the PTA with you. How do you have a public school when people start to think like that? It's not just Americans who notice this. Two of the great European philosophers, Isaiah Berlin, again, one of the great 20th century philosophers, he's like, look, it's not just the little things we disagree on. Human goals are many, not all of them commensurable and in perpetual rivalry with one another. The person who wants to maximize their freedom and the person who wants to maximize equality in a society, freedom and equality are two goals. They're incomparable. You cannot compare the goods that are associated with freedom and the goods that are associated with equality. They're not only in conflict, they're not able to be compared. So how do you live in a society where people disagree on these fundamental things? Chantal Mouffe is actually quite clear-eyed about this. She says the antagonistic dimension is always present, since what is at stake is the struggle between opposing hegemonic projects, which can never be reconciled rationally. One of them has to win and the other has to be defeated. So if you believe that, you walk into a train station and you're like, I am not losing to you people. I am not losing to you people. It doesn't end at the protest. How do you have a just and stable society over a long period of time with people who disagree on fundamental values? Diversity is not just the differences you like. So here's Jeff Stout's response to that. So here's how we live together. We exchange reasons with one another. And we just recognize that there are fundamental differences. Diversity work begins with the recognition of fundamental disagreements. It is not just samosas and egg rolls. It begins with the recognition of fundamental disagreements. You walk into a room knowing that people have different definitions of justice. And how do you deal with that room? You exchange reasons with one another. I'm going to tell you what I think of things. You are going to tell me what you think of things. And we're going to do it in a way where we seek to learn from one another. And we have to believe that even as we assume fundamental disagreement, that we can still cooperate in other ways. We can cooperate in the crafting of political arrangements. We can, even if our goals are incommensurable, we can be intelligible to one another. We can act in decency. We can do this without compromising our identities. What does this rest on? It rests on the idea that we all belong to something bigger. We're all a part of it. Justice Felix Frankfurter, the foundation of a free society is cohesive sentiment. So when I walk into a train station and I see people who fundamentally disagree with me, one of my instinctive thoughts is, they're fellow Americans. How else do you have a diverse democracy? This is the answer to Rawls's question. I want us to really think about this. Okay? How do you live in a society over a long period of time with people who you profoundly disagree with? You think of yourself as belonging to the same larger entity. That's why disaster relief workers save the houses of the people with whom they disagree. That's why people in the military fight for the freedoms of people they don't like and disagree with. If you don't believe this, why would you go to the house of the people you disagree with in a disaster? The only reason you do it is because you think to yourself, we each belong to a larger entity, and that gives us a common identity that is binding. There are parts of our identities that are in conflict, but this big part of our identity, it binds us together, this notion of cohesive sentiment. Daniel Allen, the great Harvard philosopher, does this by redefining e pluribus unum. It does not mean, she says, out of many a sameness. It means out of many a new wholeness. And these disparate parts that are sometimes in conflict, they are part of a larger whole. My favorite metaphor for this, I want to go to this first, the metaphor, and I'll go back, is that diversity work should not be thought of as a melting pot. Again, melting pot is better than a war, but it's not the ideal. You want to welcome you want to welcome variety. You want to cherish particularity. You want to nurture cohesive sentiment. And it's not a battlefield. It's not a battlefield. It's a potluck, right? So think about what makes up a potluck. First of all, you're respecting people's identities. You have a dish to bring to the potluck. It's going to be delicious, and it's going to come from your identity. Nobody ever says, you're too oppressed to bring a dish to a potluck. I want you to just sit with that for a second. Whenever I say that, people laugh, and it's funny. But just think about that for a second. Has anybody in human history ever said, you're too oppressed to bring a dish to a potluck? Because we all know instinctively that's an insult. Yeah, it's harder for some people. We shouldn't be stupid about that. We shouldn't be stupid about the fact that some people have larger kitchens and some people have smaller kitchens. We shouldn't be stupid about the fact that some people have private cars and some people got to take the bus. But your identity is sacred. And the dish that you bring to the potluck inspired by that identity is sacred. A potluck is not one thing over and over again. It's not monism. Potluck is variety. Variety is written into the nature of the universe. It's written into the story of the nation. But a potluck is not just about identities and variety, it's about combinations. It's about what happens when somebody's crusty bread recipe from Eastern Europe meets somebody else's spicy dip recipe from Lebanon. It's the combination. And it's not just the individual combinations, it's the gestalt. It's the feeling that a community has gathered. It's the sense of cohesive sentiment. Right? That's what we're cultivating at a potluck. Here's the thing about a potluck. There's a million ways it goes wrong. I started hosting potlucks when I first moved to Chicago after graduating from college. I literally have nightmares before my first potluck. You want to know why? The vegans. I'm not kidding. I had a bunch of vegan friends. It was the late 90s. I'm like, bro, they're going to be like, they're going to be mad at people. They're going to be like, somebody's going to bring meatloaf. Somebody mad at people. Vegans were fine. They were fine. And when people found out that like there are a bunch of vegans at the potluck, they started like bringing stuff that was vegan friendly. You want to know why? Because if you create the right space, most people show up well. There's a great line by Dorothy Day. How do we create spaces where it is easier for people to be good? My spin on that. How do we create spaces where it is easier for people to cooperate? A potluck is that space. They almost always go well. There's a million ways they could go off the rails, and they almost never do. That is democratic life. That is democratic life. I'm going to end with a controversy. I think that this paradigm, the paradigm of pluralism, is very different than the dominant diversity paradigm over the last 15 years. I'm going to walk this out, and then I'm going to sit down. I'm going to let President Edmondson handle the controversy. Here's what pluralism is based on. I'm going to go point for point here. Fundamental idea of pluralism. Variety is written into the nature of the universe. It's how things were meant to be. I believe that they were started by God. You might believe that the starting point is different, but the point is, it is the nature of the universe. Starting point for what has been the dominant diversity paradigm in higher ed and adjacent spaces in the last 15 years. Oppression is written into the nature of the system. Two totally different starting points. Number two, starting point in pluralism. Differences are negotiated by reason, by neighborliness, and by cohesive sentiment. In the oppressor-oppressed paradigm, differences are stifled by dogma. There's only one opinion on this. The answer is always cancer. The answer is always colonialism. Number three, pluralism emphasizes cooperation. It's work, Dewey says, to get instruments on stage to sound good together. That's work. The oppressor-oppressed paradigm emphasizes critique. How do I tell you what's wrong with things? I'm not doing the work of making the symphony sound good. I'm just going to tell you how bad it sounds. Finally, pluralism has a commitment to a whole. Really smart people, Justice Frankfurter, Danielle Allen says, it doesn't work unless you think of yourself as part of something larger. It just doesn't work. There's too many disagreements. There's too many opportunities to say, I'm tanking everything. As Chantal Mouffe says, everybody's got a hegemonic project. And if you only think about that hegemonic project, somebody else has to lose. Unless you think of yourself as part of a larger whole. And then the idea that the people you disagree with have to lose is mitigated by the idea that you both belong to the larger whole together. In the oppressor-oppressed framework, there's only the commitment to the tribe. There's only an antagonism to the whole. The whole, to go back to the beginning, is only, ever, always oppressive. But then how do you have a nation? How do you have a beloved community? And I think that's what the goal of pluralism is. It's beloved community. Thank you.
Could we pull the chairs up? Because I'm not sure they can see us on the other side. So first of all, Ibu, I cannot wait to read this book you're writing. I mean, it's going to be fabulous and incredibly timely, and thank you for sharing your thoughts on this book as you're working on it. It's going to make an incredible contribution to our discussions and to our democratic life. I do want to start by asking people to be sure to submit questions through the QR code or to raise your hand, and we'll give you a card so that you can write your question. We have 3 people in the front of the room. Rodney Mondor, who is our Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs, Dean of Students. Jane Kintz, Dr. Jane Kintz, who is our Dean for the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. And our Senior Director for Engagement from the ESM Foundation, Andy Bossi. They'll read questions to us as we get started. And so I'll ask the first question. I'm a little bit tempted to talk more about the Grateful Dead, but I think I'll let that one go
it's
for
actually
now.
Great, if you want to, it works perfectly.
I know I read your book, and I think you do a nice job of talking about how they bring such expertise and diversity, and they still play together.
Yeah,
so
right.
It's a wonderful way to think about how people come together. But I think I want to go back instead to talk about John Dewey. And John Dewey talked about the fact that education needs to be made anew, with each generation. Or I'm sorry, democracy needs to be made anew with each generation, and education is its midwife. And I think there are some people these days who may question, what does it look like for democracy to be made anew in this moment? And how is education its midwife as we think about what's needed in our country? With democracy has always been a dream. It's always an imperfect thing that we're working toward. Mm-hmm. Pluralism, as you've laid out, has been an idea that's evolved and changed over time. So how do we navigate that space where we are creating democracy anew, given what we're facing today?
Yeah. So I want to address that question in this way, which is, I think the way that I increasingly see this is we're writing the next chapter in a story. And the reason I do this talk is, what is that story? What is the story that we're writing the next chapter in? Mm-hmm. Right? And so this, in other words, we are not beginning from nothing. We are not beginning, and that's the case, I think, in the nation. I think it's the case in music. I think it's the case in it's obviously the case in a religious tradition. There's the classic line on this is by Alistair McIntyre, right? And McIntyre says, the fundamental question for humans is not what is our authorship. It is, what story do we belong to? Now, I am more of a Deweyan than McIntyre is, right? So I like the best of both worlds. I like to ask the question, what story am I a part of? And what chapter am I part of authoring in that story, right? And so I wonder, and I think this is an interesting back and forth between us. I think what concerns me now is not so much that people are not willing to create things anew. I think there's lots of like, hey, let's create things anew. I think that there is a lack of knowledge about the stories that we are a part of, right? And so what I just did, like 30 years ago, this would have been common knowledge for graduate students.
Yep.
It would have been common knowledge, right? That, in other words, that Madison leads to Lincoln. There's a connection with James. There's Callan. There's Locke. This is the mainstream tradition of how you think about diversity in American life. It's both a diversity of identities, and it's also a set of differences on major issues. How do we think about those things, right? And it is not common knowledge anymore. And so I think telling that story and asking the question, what chapter are you writing? I think it is fine for people to say, I reject the story, but you need to know it first. Yeah. Right? You need to know it first. And I mean, part of it is I think there's like beautiful metaphors in this. So, Kerry James Marshall, the great black artist, he's like, why is everybody mad at the European masters? There's a reason we call them masters, because they were very good at what they did, okay? So, they painted their world. Their world was white and full of fruit baskets. I mean, why am I going to be mad like this? They painted that world, right? I'm going to learn from them, and I'm going to paint my world, right? Miles Davis gets to New York in the 40s and 50s, and he's around all these black musicians who are like, bro, I'm not listening to European classical music. Those white boys. Miles Davis is like, are you nuts? You're not going to listen to Beethoven? You're not going to learn from everything? Why wouldn't you learn from everything? Why wouldn't you know the broader story that you're a part of? Reject it if you want, right? But I'm not rejecting it, right? I am inventing new chapters in that tradition, right? And so I think that the biggest problem right now is not the absence of the new. It is the lack of knowledge of this set of traditions.
And that is exactly why you are the inaugural keynote speaker, because I've recognized that as well. And this is where I wanted us to begin our conversations about American democracy, with this story and this history and this trajectory that I find people don't know either. And we have so much more to learn about it, but you've really given us a wonderful foundation with which to start our work here at the University of Southern Maine and in our communities. So I'll turn it over to see if Jane has a question for us. Dr. Kintz.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. These are questions, I think, from students and are specific to a university or college campus. It's, how can today's college campuses balance free expression with the responsibility to foster respectful dialogue across difference? And another person asked, for really, sort of more practical advice, like, pluralism seems to require that both sides have an interest in a productive dialogue. This person says, that's not actually been my experience with some people. So how do we move past this? I find that people who disagree with me have no interest in even engaging in a conversation. So can we think about that in a college campus and classroom environment specifically?
Yeah. So these are great questions. By the way, the time that I spent with your students this afternoon, just awesome. Just awesome. I will remember for a long time. So there's a great line, again, by McIntyre, who says, the purpose of higher education is to initiate people into conflict. Okay, I'm going to say that again. The purpose of higher education is to initiate people into conflict. Meaning, once you step foot on a college campus, you are learning about the great conflicts in your diverse democracy. McIntyre goes on, and you learn how to order your arguments around the conflict. A college campus should be so good at this that the other institutions in the society learn from the university how to order their own arguments around a conflict. So, I'm going to tell you a story. So, my older son was 8th grade during the pandemic. Younger son was 6th grade, 5th grade. And I watched my older son science class online. He leans into the camera and he says, Mr. Schwabi, whatever the guy's name was, science teacher, how come sometimes when there are clouds in the sky it rains and sometimes when there are clouds in the sky it doesn't? Mr. Schwabi was so happy. He was like, well, Zaid, let's consider that question. But Zaid had already turned the camera off and he was playing video games. He knew just to ask one question and then, so I'm like, all right, this is not what I'm going to call an education. So you know what we're going to do? I'm going to let you get out of Zoom school and you're going to read Kwame Anthony Appiah's The Ethicist with me every week. You know what this is? Every week, one of the great philosophers of the last 50 years, Kwame Anthony Appiah, at New York University, writes in the New York Times Magazine for everybody to see. He chooses a fascinating set of disagreements in common life, and he says, here's how you resolve this. Can you cast non-Jews in Fiddler on the Roof? If you are a proud atheist and you are bringing your family, husband and kids, to your parents' home for Thanksgiving, and they are staunch evangelicals and they say grace before meals, what do you tell your 8 and 10-year-olds to do? And he takes these questions, right? These profound questions about disagreement that are common questions, and he helps you think about them. That is what I think you should do in hour 2 on a college campus. Literally, after you move into your room, Your freshman orientation leaders should lead you through a set of ethicist questions by Kwame Anthony Appiah. They're 3 paragraphs long, 2 paragraphs long. Again, like my 8th grade son did them with me. I don't care how much he complained, you know? And what Appiah does is he frames the issue. Here's what's at stake here. Here's what other great thinkers have thought about this. Here's how we should think about the various identities that are in the mix here. Here's a practical way forward. In other words, right, what you are doing is you are practicing how to talk about conflict with a diverse group of people. It's an initiation of the conflict. So I think that that's like what a college education should be. That is part of what you should get. And what that means is that the professionals on a college should excel at facilitating that, right? You are setting that up as the culture. This is just the expectation. This is what we do here. This is what we do here. Okay? That is the practice of pluralism. It's a skill set. It's a skill set. Pluralism is baseball. And baseball is hard. It is hard to play shortstop. It is hard to play second base. You can't just say, I like the idea of this. You actually have to practice the skills of it. Right? So I'm going to move to something else real quick. The students I was with this afternoon, I love the Bear, the FX series. Like I love the Bulls of the '90s. I love the Grateful Dead. I love the Bear. I love any endeavor that a group of people are trying to make beautiful. And the Bear is a show about beauty. And there is a scene in the Bear that I just think nails what it looks like to navigate a conflict through dialogue. Okay, so anybody here familiar with the Bear? Okay, so season 2, you remember the fishes episode, like the massive explosion at the family fight at the dinner table. Okay, I know that gives some people hives. They're like, oh man, that was like every Thanksgiving in my house, you know. So in season 4, there's this episode where Carmy, the chef, the brother of this guy Mikey, who commits suicide, is in the kitchen alone with the guy who fights with Mikey at this Christmas dinner. Right? So one of the last memories that this guy has of his now deceased brother is this fight that these two guys get in at the Christmas dinner table. So they're in the kitchen together. Okay? And Carmy's like, what the hell are you doing here? And just goes after this guy. And Carmy, you can see him getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And he takes out a set of Nicorette gum and he eats a piece of gum. And the other guy is also hot. And he sees Carmy eat the Nicorette and he says, can I have a piece? And Carmy gives him a piece of Nicorette. And he's chewing. And you can just tell the conversation subtly shifts, just very subtly. It's just not as angry anymore. Okay? The Baba Durnka character has made himself just a little vulnerable by asking something. Like it's almost chemical. And Carmy is put in the position of being asked for something, so now he has to be generous. And it's almost a chemical shift. So the conversation changes. And 3 or 4 minutes later, Carmy says, trying to quit? And Baba Durnkic says, no. See? He just knew the way you change this conversation is you make yourself a little vulnerable, not enough to be attacked, but in a way that allows somebody else to be generous. And it just shifts it a little bit, right? So that's like Jedi level stuff, right? But honestly, why do you go to college except to be around Jedis? I'm totally serious, right? It's like Kerry James Marshall, the European masters. Of course I'm going to learn from them. Miles Davis, Beethoven, of course I'm going to learn from him. I want to be a Jedi, so I'm going to learn from Jedis, right? If you want to excel at this, Learn from Jedis, right? And I think a college campus should be a place where there are people who are Jedis at conversation.
That sounds great. Thank you. We'll go on to Andy. I think he has the next question.
Thanks. Coming off of that same concept of like, what's the role of universities? This person asks, what's the role of civic institutions more generally in promoting and fostering pluralism, be it libraries, community centers, schools? And I think that could be expanded further in not only strengthening pluralism and fostering it and strengthening democracy, but how do we do so in a time where trust in these institutions is declining?
Yeah. These are such great questions. So I'm going to go back to Jeff Stout for a second, and I'm going to say, like, this is Jeff Stout, and I see a lot of Jane Addams here also. So Jeff Stout, in this long book, Democracy and Tradition is what it's called, in which he says this thing about, what democracy is about is giving resources to each other. He says towards the end of the book, all right, I said a bunch of fancy things. He says, you know what really makes my community work? The soccer league. That's what really makes it work, okay? The soccer league. The soccer league. Why? Because people who disagree do something together. Right? We play together. We're like the guy who you've argued with at the PTA meeting, he's now the left wing on the soccer team. What are you gonna do? Be like, I can't stand your opinion, I'm not letting you score? He's on your team, right?
Yeah.
I actually think the thing that makes America work is the civic institute. This is a huge part of my book, We Need to Build.
Yeah.
Is the civic institutions that gather people on non-controversial topics like soccer leagues in ways that require them to cooperate. I think that's what makes America work, right? So, my kid played in a baseball team in which there was a very pro-Israeli guy and a very pro-Palestinian guy who were the assistant coaches of the team. They disagreed on something really important. You know what the kids call them? First base coach and third base coach. That's why America works. And by the way, whatever you think about what is happening over there, and it is really important, I think this is part of the genius of pluralism, you don't have to de-emphasize the disagreement. You just have to recognize that the other things really matter too. So here's a serious question. For what issue would you kill your son's Little League team? Serious question. For what issue? Right? For what issue would you be like, I am not coaching with you. I am not having my kid on that team. For what issue would you tank your public library? And part of the genius of this is these are meant to be relatively non-controversial spaces. Which is why I think, even though I'm broadly speaking a center-left person, that the bringing of partisan politics into civic spaces weakens American democracy. I realize I just made a controversial point, right? I was the undergrad who was like, everything is political, and at some point, one of my professors the person who taught me that got tired of me chanting it at her face. And she's like, bruh, maybe the fire department's not political. Seriously, in the sense of do you want, when you call the fire department, do you want them to ask who you voted for? By the way, do you think that doesn't happen in some parts of the world? Right? Go to Google and Google Mostar New York Times.